So here we are in video 3 of the History of Television series here on the Microwave One channel. And I want to try to approach digital TV in a way that doesn't favor one system over another. I want to give you the technology, and we're going to look at the waveforms. Remember, it's all about the waveforms on the air that I'm trying to discuss, not really the politics of digital TV. In this video, we're going to run into different consortiums, groups, alliances between industry, scientists, and manufacturers, both of the transmission equipment and the reception equipment. There's going to be regulatory bodies involved, the FCC and different types of EU entities. Remember, rule 1 with any regulatory authority is do not cause any harmful interference. That's rule 1. And what's harmful interference? That's interference to another service, entity, or legitimate user on the frequency. In this case, we're mostly worried about the legacy system, the analog system. We want to put digital signals alongside analog systems. Why? Well, that's because any change is going to cause an upheaval in the industry. We can't just turn on digital and turn off analog. Well, maybe we can in some cases, but it doesn't work that way over here in the US at least. You have to be able to live with the other system for a little while. Usually there's a mandate that comes in that says you're going to have to be on the air so long with both systems. That's a fact of life with most improvements in technology that are not disruptive. Remember, a disruptive technology comes out of the blue. This is not disruptive technology. Everybody saw this coming. Everybody anticipated it coming. Therefore, let's all play by the rules, get these digital signals on the air without causing harmful interference to the older legacy analog systems. So here we go, part 3. Let's look at digital. So we went over some of the analog TV fundamentals as well as a history of TV in that last video. I had some comments about ATSC 3.0 and digital in general from one of the guys that was watching the video, that really these waveforms are all analog. Even though we talk about a digital signal and we talk about an analog signal, once you're broadcasting something over the air, it's analog. How you format it, how you produce it, how you prepare it, add error correction, and so on, those are digital techniques. So we tend to call those digital waveforms. The term digital waveform is really a misnomer. What we send over the air is an analog signal, no matter how it was created by analog means or created by digital means. And there is no digital antenna, by the way. That's all clever marketing. At some point, any signal containing digital data must be turned into an analog RF signal that can be converted, amplified, and broadcasted over the air. And like all RF and light waves in space, certain physical constraints affect these signals in the real world. These include path loss, attenuation, signal blockage, reflections, multipath interference, time delays, Doppler shift, and receiver front-end overload. These issues do not go away unless corrected for in some way. When the analog solutions are exhausted, however, we add more power, more antenna gain, more directivity, having a better receiver with more sensitivity, selectivity, and dynamic range. We even resort to more bandwidth after we've exhausted all of those analog techniques. This is where we can bring in some digital techniques, and these can play a significant role in correcting some of those errors created by those analog effects. Let's talk about some of those analog effects. Let's do the basic one, path loss. People ask, what's the difference between a VHF antenna and a UHF antenna? Well, for starters, if you're listening to a signal at 100 megahertz and you double the frequency to 200 megahertz, you just took a 6 dB path loss hit.
Now imagine going from 100 megahertz to 1000 megahertz. That's like low VHF to high UHF. You're going to take several tens of dB of path loss. Right out of the box, a VHF antenna with maybe only 4 elements can outperform a 20 element UHF beam, just because at VHF you have so much less path loss. Another one we should talk about is reflections in multipath. Let's take a look at some multipath effects. So Mike, when are we going to get to the ATSC and the DVB-T stuff? Hold on, we got to get through this analog stuff first. We used to call multipath interference ghosting in the old analog TV days. Basically, a usually temporary reflection of the TV signal coming from the tower against a vehicle, a building, a tree, or something would produce a copy of the signal somewhat delayed in time to be combined with the primary wave signal. This interfering copy of the signal, usually coming in from another angle, would combine to aid or destroy the picture, and it might damage the sync information, causing line loss or a vertical roll even. We remedied this in the old days by using polarized directional beam antennas that would reject off-center signals and tend to focus on the main beam from the tower and reject the angular multipath rays. Polarization and directivity were the primary first-order weapons. Antennas with low beam width, accurately pointed with rotors, and a good front-to-back ratio, low side lobes, these are all preferred over pure gain. So I mentioned antenna polarity or polarization. Have you noticed that most receive TV antennas are horizontal? TV broadcast used horizontal transmitting antennas during the first 30 years exclusively. TV stations sent out an omnidirectional, horizontally polarized waveform from their antennas. Using a horizontally polarized antenna on the receive end to match the tower's polarization gave you rejection from multipath interference reflections that might come in from any angle or polarization. Most two-way radios and noise itself are vertically propagated and polarized, so it also rejected those somewhat compared to a vertical antenna on the receive end. Don't count vertical out yet, however, because a lot of TV today is indoor and mobile platforms are growing all the time, and these generally require some amount of vertical polarization. But even these simple matching ideas where you have a horizontal transmitter antenna and a horizontal receive antenna can be improved upon. If the TV station uses circular polarization, say right-hand circular or right-hand elliptical or EP, and you use a right-hand circular polarized receive antenna, an additional protection against first-order bounce, and that is single hop bounce, is afforded since the reflected ray reverses its polarization on the bounce. Thus the antenna gives up to 20 dB of additional rejection of the multipath since the reflection is now cross-polarized. The FCC modified the rules in the 70s to allow stations to begin to use circular polarization. Not many took this up, however, because the equipment's more costly, the antennas are more costly, and almost double the power is required. CP has not taken over at the tower for broadcasters even today, although a 5 to 6 dB in signal variability would certainly result with CP, and it would give antenna manufacturers so many more cool and interesting products to sell on eBay. Of course, we all want paper plate antennas and rabbit ears and just something we put up on the wall, a paper clip, whatever. But these analog antenna properties are still 100% valid and highly desirable for improving digital signal reception in difficult environments. So reflections and signal delay can cause just as much trouble as a low signal level at the TV set.
Towards the end of the analog era, we had solid state, and there were even some application-specific ICs that began to be built. And these would take whole sections of this 20 to 30 tube television and condense it down to a few integrated circuits on a PC board. So that's the direction it went. There were further refinements, modifications, and improvements made to all of the standards. And towards the end, the quality of the color TV was quite good. Notably, the Trinitron display produced high-quality video picture, both in color and black and white. So now we're going to move into the digital world.
The first over-the-air digital TV system proposed was Digital Video Broadcasting Terrestrial, or DVB-T, brought in by a Euro consortium, and the standard was published in 1997. This system transmits compressed digital audio, digital video, and other data in an MPEG transport stream using coded orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, or COFDM. What is COFDM? Or even why COFDM? You remember what I showed about multipath disturbing or even destroying critical parts of an analog waveform? Multipath sweeps through. It's seldom static in nature. Think of it as a disturbance or suckout sweeping through a waveform. Likewise, a digitally produced waveform like QAM, perhaps with an added pilot carrier, can easily be disturbed. Even with advanced coding and error correction, the waveform can be damaged beyond immediate repair. We're talking about high data rate digital video content here, where delays are not really welcome. COFDM is a new approach that builds in true waveform redundancy while preserving the efficiency of a high-order digital modulation like QPSK and QAM. But it's in a more robust multi-carrier approach. COFDM works by splitting the digital data stream into a large number of slower digital streams, each of which digitally modulate a set of closely spaced adjacent subcarrier frequencies. In the case of DVB-T, there are two choices for the number of carriers known as 2K mode or 8K mode. These are actually 1705 carriers or 6817 subcarriers that are approximately 4 kHz or 1 kHz apart, respectively. DVB-T offers 3 different modulation schemes: QPSK, 16QAM, or 64QAM. Let's break down COFDM. The C stands for coded. The data coding includes many digital techniques, including data compression and packetization, error correction at several levels, including convolutional interleaving, several coding rates, bit mapping. Orthogonal simply means that the tightly packed carriers can be separated easily at the receive end with FFT and timing techniques rather than by simple filtering. FDM is frequency division multiplex, a way to send multiple signals separated by frequency, all on one transmission channel. DVB-T with COFDM, which was rolled out in Europe in the late 2000s, is very robust in the presence of multipath compared to analog TV, but it was adopted only for electronic news gathering, or ENG links, in the US. DVB-T does allow for single frequency networks, or SFNs, as long as the distance delay is inside the guard interval period. After that period, new symbols are transmitted. SFNs are 2 or more towers or repeaters transmitting the same channel information and content at the same time and on the same channel with no disturbances. It was deemed a bridge too far for the broadcasters in many markets, including the US, where the change from analog to digital TV was presenting significant practical and financial obstacles to their interests. These included the replacement of transmission equipment, amplifiers especially, and linearity, meeting FCC specifications, backward compatibility, and many other factors. DVB-T is still alive and well in markets worldwide. Data shows that it did, and it still does, outperform analog TV. You know how we say, all things being equal, that such and such has more range than something else? The problem is all things are not equal between analog and digital systems. Take a look at this typical highly linear power amp spec. This amp is designed for either analog or digital television in the UHF band. It meets all specifications. It becomes very apparent that the amplifier can produce more signal power to the antenna with analog or 8VSB than it can with both forms of COFDM, either DVB-T or ATSC 3.0. So we can infer that the analog reception might be better than with digital, producing a better carrier-to-noise ratio at maximum range. Unless a broadcaster took steps to add more amplifier modules, or the digital standard receiver has added processing gain to make up the difference, you're going to see a problem at the extended ranges or the fringe areas. This is a different issue than the multipath problem that we have in urban and suburban environments. This is the guys way out there that are claiming analog I could see, but I can't get digital. This was an issue and a decision factor in the choices between analog, 8VSB, and COFDM. So before getting into the tech part on ATSC, ATSC is the Advanced Television Systems Committee. It's an international nonprofit organization developing voluntary standards and recommended practices for digital terrestrial broadcasting. The ATSC standards were developed in the early 1990s by the Grand Alliance, a consortium of electronics and telecommunications companies that assembled to develop a specification for what we now call HDTV. Now, DVB-T was doing the exact same thing pretty much at the exact same time. So these were going to be two worldwide digital standards, both being developed at the same time. ATSC member organizations represented the broadcast equipment, motion picture industries, consumer electronics, computer, cable, satellite, and semiconductor industries. ATSC is largely a replacement for the old analog NTSC standard, and like that standard, it's most often used in NTSC countries like the United States, Mexico, Canada, South Korea, Trinidad and Tobago. There are several former NTS users that did not follow. Japan, for instance, went from NTSC to their own digital implementation. ATSC recommended an 8-level amplitude-based digital system called 8-level vestigial sideband, or 8VSB. Rather than the more complex COFDM implementation, this was a simple 8-level amplitude-based digital system. Broadcasters could continue to use much of their existing analog equipment in the station, with only the modulation processor added initially. It was thought that this would make the digital transition more palatable to the broadcasters. Terrestrial local broadcasters use the 8VSB modulation, and it can transfer at a maximum rate of 19.39 megabits per second. This is sufficient to carry several video and audio programs and even some data over the air.
Now, we all know that compression has improved through the years. We started out, of course, with MPEG-1, then MPEG-2 came along, and with MPEG-2 you can do a lot. As a matter of fact, most broadcasters, most TV stations, they're still using their MPEG-2 equipment happily. There's no strings attached. There's really, the patents have run out and it's all ready to go. Let's use MPEG-2 forever. But with digital TV, you want to get as much content in as narrow a bandwidth as possible. So some of these modern coding systems are really a big part of the standard. And this is how we're going to be able to take our little 6 or 7 megahertz of bandwidth and be able to put in multiple channels instead of just one channel like we had with the older analog system.
ATSC uses 188-byte MPEG transport stream packets to carry the data. Before decoding of audio and video takes place, the receiver must demodulate and apply error correction to the signal. Then the transport stream may be demultiplexed into its constituent streams. In December of 1996, the FCC approved ATSC 1.0, the digital television standard for the U.S. In 1997, the first full-power broadcasters went on the air with permanent digital television broadcast licenses. By 1998, the first consumer receivers were going on sale. By 1999, the FCC established on-air deadlines for the broadcasters to go digital. But in June of 1999, Sinclair Broadcast Group, which is an affiliation of broadcasters, conducted demonstrations that compared the reception of COFDM and 8VSB signals in the real world. They lobbied the industry and the FCC to retract their approval of the ATSC standard. This was a shootout, and the recommendation is we don't want to do 8VSB ATSC. We want to go COFDM. There was a concerted effort to go to COFDM as the replacement for NTSC. And the 1999 Sinclair broadcast demonstrations that compared the reception of COFDM and 8VSB signals were used to lobby the FCC and the industry to retract approval of the ATSC standard. In September 30th, 1999, the FCC issued a report on COFDM and 8VSB performance, and it reaffirmed the performance of the Grand Alliance and ATSC 8VSB transmission approach. The OET, and this is a quote, the OET concludes that the relative benefits of changing the DTV to COFDM are unclear and would not outweigh the costs of making such a revision. The OET therefore recommends that ATSC 8VSB standard be retained. So that's the rest of the story. But it's not over yet, and Sinclair would eventually be vindicated. ATSC 3.0 recommends COFDM out of the box. The DVB-T and ATSC 1.0 controversy was solved by the FCC picking one and standing by their decision. There was simply too much inertia. By the early 2000s, it was probably too late to transition to COFDM anyway, and there was really no roadmap or way to get to COFDM. Pretty soon, so many standards for all kinds of services had transitioned to COFDM by the 2010s that the industry really started to look at COFDM. Meanwhile, they had seen what COFDM was doing for electronic news gathering, wireless sports, and drone cameras, for instance. ATSC 3.0 transitions to a COFDM waveform. Currently, 3.0 is voluntary for all the broadcasters. 3.0 utilizes 8,000, 16,000, or 32,000 subcarriers, and each one is individually modulated in both amplitude and phase. ATSC 3.0 provides an improvement over the existing OFDM-based DTV standards through the use of the latest low-density parity check-forward error correction codes and optimized constellations ranging from QPSK all the way to 4096 QAM. Different combinations of codes, pilot patterns, and constellations can now be selected to allow data rates ranging from less than 1 megabit per second, extremely robust mode working at less than 0 dB signal-to-noise ratio, to over 57 megabits per second, when a much higher signal-to-noise ratio is available. The basic rate improvements compared to ATSC 1.0, 19.38 megabits per second, will be probably around 28 megabits per second, and that's in the same 6 megahertz channel. ATSC 3.0 OFDM waveform has a higher peak-to-average ratio than ATSC 1.0, so broadcasters may need to update their transmitter output power to keep their footprint. It supports a single frequency network, of course. That's a main selling point. So this video is getting pretty long, but keeping with the waveform only discussion, let's look at the DVB-T2 upgrade in Europe. First of all, it's compatible with the existing transmission infrastructure. This means that broadcasters can upgrade from DVB-T to DVB-T2 without having to replace all their equipment, making the transition relatively easy and cost-effective. So this upgrade's not as radical as with the ATSC 1.0 to 3.0 transition. DVB-T2 enhances the capabilities of DVB-T by incorporating more advanced modulation and coding techniques. With DVB-T2, broadcasters can transmit more content within the available bandwidth, resulting in a higher data throughput, improved efficiency, better reception quality, and so on. It's basically a software upgrade. So a lot of this is that future-proofing software upgrade stuff. That capability is built into the original standard. ATSC 3.0, of course, is touting this future-proof business also, but they're a little bit late to the game. So basically, you're going to get better audio and video quality, more channels within the same band, better spectral efficiency, reducing the required bandwidth and allowing the reallocation of available spectrum for other services. I think we all know what that means. Looks like there's going to be a little spectrum reallocation.
So this third video has been a lot of fun. We've been able to go through some of the reasons and politics behind why things have evolved as they have with the digital rollout around the world. And I know it's very confusing and kind of wasteful, but there are a lot of interested parties here that stand to gain or lose based on the decisions made. Basically, these are foundational decisions that are made, some of them by committee and some of them simply by political views and some by just cash. He who pays the most gets his way. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this third video. That's a little foray into TV that my channel does not normally get into, but I wanted to handle the ATSC 3.0 controversy because beyond the typical controversies, we do need to understand the technical reasoning and the technical complexities of the standards.